The morning mist hung over Windsor Castle like a thin gray blanket. James Matthews adjusted his red tunic and checked his watch. 6:30 sharp. He had been a Queen's Guard for 12 years, and punctuality was more than a habit. It was a sacred duty. Walking through the castle's ancient corridors, James could hear the soft clicking of tiny claws on marble floors. Even after 4 months, the sound still made his chest tighten. Those were the Corgis, the late Queen's beloved companions who now wandered these halls like living memories of their departed mistress. James had served Queen Elizabeth II faithfully for over a decade. He remembered the first time he saw her with her dogs, how her stern royal facade would melt into pure joy whenever one of them trotted into the room. The Queen had 15 Corgis during his time of service, each one treated like precious family members. "They're not just pets, you know," the Queen had once told him during a rare moment of casual conversation. "They're my constant companions. They don't care about crowns or protocols. They just want love and loyalty." Now, those same Corgis were adjusting to life without their beloved owner. James had watched them search for her in empty rooms, their little tails wagging hopefully at every footstep that wasn't hers. It broke something inside him that he couldn't quite name. The new queen consort, Camilla, had a different relationship with the animals. She wasn't unkind to them, but James could see the practical calculations in her eyes whenever she looked at the pack of small, energetic dogs. Where Queen Elizabeth saw family, Queen Camilla saw responsibility. James understood the burden. Caring for 15 Corgis was no small task. They needed daily walks, special diets, medical attention, and constant companionship. The Queen had managed it all with the help of dedicated staff, but she had also genuinely loved every moment spent with her furry family. As he walked past the Queen's former private chambers, James noticed movement inside. Queen Camilla was there, dressed in a simple morning robe, speaking quietly with Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper who had managed the Corgis' care for the past 8 years. "We simply cannot continue like this," he heard Queen Camilla saying. 15 dogs running around the castle, getting underfoot during state functions. It's becoming problematic." Mrs. Henderson nodded respectfully, but James could see the worry in her weathered face. She had loved those Corgis almost as much as the late Queen had. "What would you suggest, Your Majesty?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "We need to find them good homes, people who will love them properly," Queen Camilla replied. "I've been making a list of suitable candidates." James felt his stomach drop. He knew this day would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it terrifyingly real. Those Corgis weren't just the late Queen's pets. They were the last living connection to the woman who had dedicated her life to service and duty. He continued his patrol, trying to focus on his duties, but his mind kept returning to the conversation he had overheard. Later that morning, while standing guard outside the throne room, James spotted Whiskers, the oldest of the Corgis, lying in a patch of sunlight near the window. The little dog looked lost and sad, his usual energetic spirit dimmed by grief. James had always been fond of Whiskers. The Corgi had a distinctive white patch over his left eye that made him instantly recognizable. More importantly, Whiskers had been the Queen's absolute favorite. She would sneak him extra treats and allow him to sleep on her bed, a privilege not granted to the others. During quiet moments in his guard duty, James had sometimes been tasked with walking the Corgis when the regular staff was busy. Whiskers always stayed close to him, as if sensing that James understood the weight of loss they both carried. The afternoon brought an unexpected encounter. James was stationed near the castle's main entrance when Queen Camilla approached, walking briskly with her assistant, Margaret Finch. They were deep in conversation about household arrangements. "Good afternoon, Your Majesty," James said, standing at attention. Queen Camilla paused and looked at him with those calculating eyes he had noticed before. "Guardsman Matthews, isn't it?" Yes, Your Majesty. I understand you've been helping with the Corgis from time to time. James felt a flutter of nervousness. Only when requested by the household staff, Your Majesty. Light duties, walking them in the grounds. Exactly. Queen Camilla stepped closer. You seem to have a way with them. They listen to you. This was true. James had always been good with animals, even as a child growing up on his family's small farm in Yorkshire. His mother used to joke that he spoke dog language better than English. They're wonderful animals, Your Majesty, James replied carefully. Queen Camilla studied his face for a long moment. Walk with me, guardsman. This was highly unusual. James glanced toward his superior officer, who nodded permission. He fell into step beside the queen consort and her assistant, maintaining proper distance and protocol. They walked through the castle's portrait gallery, past hundreds of years of royal history captured in oil and gold frames. Queen Camilla moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished floors. The late queen loved those dogs more than most people, she said without looking at him. Did you know she insisted on feeding them herself every evening? Even when she was ill, even when protocol demanded her attention elsewhere, those dogs came first. James said nothing, understanding that this was not really a conversation, but rather the queen consort thinking out loud. I admire that dedication, Queen Camilla continued, but I'm not her. I have different strengths, different priorities. Those Corgis deserve someone who can love them the way she did. They stopped in front of a large portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, painted just 5 years earlier. In the painting, she sat regally in her ceremonial robes, but at her feet were 3 Corgis, painted with almost as much care and detail as the Queen herself. Beautiful work, Queen Camilla murmured, looking up at the portrait. The artist captured something essential about her, don't you think? The way her eyes softened just slightly when looking down at her companions. James looked at the painting and felt that familiar tightness in his chest. She loved them very much, Your Majesty. Yes, she did. Queen Camilla turned to face him directly. Which is why I need to ask something of you, Guardsman Matthews. The formality in her voice made James stand straighter. Yes, Your Majesty. I've been considering the future of the Corgis, and your name has come up several times in my discussions with the household staff. You have a natural rapport with them, you understand their needs, and you've served this family with distinction. James felt a cold understanding creeping over him. He could see where this conversation was heading. I would like you to consider taking one of them, Queen Camilla said. Whiskers, specifically. He seems particularly attached to you, and I believe you would provide him with a loving home. The request hung in the air between them like a challenge. James felt his mind racing through a dozen different responses, none of them adequate for the magnitude of what she was asking. Taking Whiskers would mean leaving his position as a Queen's Guard. Military regulations were clear about pets in service housing. It would mean returning to civilian life, finding new employment, completely restructuring his existence around caring for the Queen's most beloved companion. But more than that, it felt like accepting defeat, like admitting that the connection between the late Queen and her Corgis was truly severed, that nothing remained of that pure love except the burden of responsibility. Your Majesty, I am honored by your confidence in me, James began carefully. Queen Camilla raised her hand slightly. Don't answer now. Think about it. Take your time. But I wanted you to know that you're my first choice for Whiskers. I believe the Queen would have approved. With that, she continued walking, leaving James standing alone in front of the portrait. He stared up at Queen Elizabeth II's painted face, looking for guidance that would never come. That evening, James found himself in the castle gardens during his off-duty hours. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the carefully manicured lawns. Whiskers appeared from behind a hedge, trotting over with the slightly awkward gait of an aging dog. James knelt down and scratched behind Whiskers' ears. The corgi pressed against his legs, seeking comfort and warmth. "What am I going to do with you, old boy?" James whispered. Whiskers looked up at him with those intelligent brown eyes that had seen the Queen laugh and cry, had witnessed state dinners and private moments, had been present for history in the making. Taking Whiskers would mean giving up everything James had worked for in his military career. But leaving him might mean watching the last living piece of the Queen's heart get scattered to the winds. As darkness fell over Windsor Castle, James sat on a garden bench with Whiskers curled up beside him, both of them carrying the weight of impossible choices and the burden of love that outlasts life itself. The corgi's steady breathing against his leg reminded James that some responsibilities transcend duty, some loyalties run deeper than protocol, and sometimes the hardest decision is knowing when to hold your ground and when to let go. Tomorrow would bring Queen Camilla's expectation of an answer. Tonight brought only questions and the soft warmth of a grieving dog who trusted him completely. In the distance, the castle's windows glowed with warm light, but James felt the cold reality of change settling around him like the evening mist. Nothing would ever be the same again, and somehow he would have to find a way to honor both his duty and his heart. 3 days passed before Queen Camilla requested James's answer. 3 days of restless nights, conversations with fellow guards, and long walks through Windsor's gardens with Whiskers trailing beside him like a faithful shadow. On Tuesday morning, James received a formal summons to meet Queen Camilla in the blue drawing room at precisely 2 o'clock. The message, delivered by Margaret Finch, was polite, but carried the unmistakable weight of royal command. James spent the morning hours performing his regular duties with mechanical precision. He stood guard during the changing ceremony, inspected younger guards' uniforms, and maintained the stoic expression expected of his position. But inside, his thoughts churned like storm clouds. He had spoken with his mother the night before, calling her small cottage in Yorkshire where she still kept 2 sheepdogs and a barn cat that had wandered in during a snowstorm 5 years ago. "Love isn't always about taking, Jamie," she had said in her practical Yorkshire accent. "Sometimes love means knowing what's right, even when it breaks your heart." His mother had always called him Jamie, even after he joined the military and preferred the formality of James. She had a way of cutting through complicated situations with simple wisdom earned through decades of hard living and genuine care for others. "But what if I'm the only one who understands what he needs, Mom?" James had asked. "Then you'll find a way to make sure he gets it, won't you? That's who you are, son. You've never walked away from something that needed doing." Now, as James made his way to the blue drawing room, his mother's words echoed in his mind alongside the weight of his decision. The blue drawing room was one of the castle's more intimate spaces, though intimate was relative when discussing royal residences. Rich blue silk wallpaper covered the walls, punctuated by portraits of previous monarchs and delicate gold fixtures that caught the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. Queen Camilla was already waiting, seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace. She wore a navy blue dress with pearl accessories, every inch the image of royal composure. Margaret Finch stood nearby with a leather portfolio, presumably containing documents related to the Corgis' future arrangements. "Guardsman Matthews," Queen Camilla said as James entered and bowed appropriately. "Please, sit." This was another breach of normal protocol. James typically stood in the presence of royalty unless specifically invited to do otherwise. He chose a chair across from the Queen Consort, maintaining respectful distance. "I trust you've had time to consider my proposal regarding Whiskers," she began without preamble. "Yes, Your Majesty. I have given it considerable thought." Queen Camilla leaned forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap. And your decision? James had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, trying different approaches, different words, different ways of explaining what he felt in his heart. But now, facing the queen consort directly, all his careful preparation seemed inadequate. Your Majesty, I am deeply honored that you would consider me worthy of caring for one of the Queen's beloved companions, he began. Whiskers is a remarkable animal, and I have grown genuinely fond of him during our time together. Queen Camilla nodded encouragingly, clearly expecting him to accept her offer. However, James continued, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart, I cannot accept Whiskers as my personal pet. The change in Queen Camilla's expression was immediate and subtle, a slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible straightening of her shoulders. I see, she said coolly. May I ask why? This was the moment James had dreaded. How could he explain without seeming disrespectful or insubordinate? How could he make her understand that his refusal came from love, not indifference? Your Majesty, Whiskers isn't just a dog. He's a living connection to Queen Elizabeth II. He carries her memory in his heart just as we carry it in ours. James paused, choosing his words carefully. Taking him away from Windsor Castle, separating him from his pack, removing him from the only home he's ever known, I believe that would be a betrayal of the trust the Queen placed in all of us to care for the things she loved. Queen Camilla's face remained impassive, but James could sense her displeasure building like pressure in a sealed container. The Queen is gone, Guardsman Matthews, she said firmly. These animals need practical care, not sentimental attachment to the past. With respect, Your Majesty, I disagree. The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Margaret Finch shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the dangerous territory this conversation had entered. James knew he was risking everything, his career, his reputation, possibly even his freedom, if his words were interpreted as treasonous disrespect. But something deeper than self-preservation was driving him now. The late Queen devoted her entire life to duty and service, he continued. She asked nothing for herself except the companionship of these animals who loved her unconditionally. They were her reward for 70 years of sacrifice, scattering them to different homes, breaking up their pack, treating them as burdens to be managed. I cannot be part of that. Queen Camilla stood abruptly, her composure crackling like thin ice. Are you questioning my judgment regarding household arrangements? I am respectfully declining to participate in what I believe would be contrary to the late Queen's wishes. The late Queen is dead! The words exploded from Queen Camilla with surprising force. I am responsible for this household now, and I will not have a guardsman, a mere soldier, lecture me about royal duty. James rose to his feet, standing at attention as he had been trained, but his voice remained calm and resolute. Your Majesty, I mean no disrespect to your authority. I am simply explaining why I cannot accept Whiskers as a personal gift. My duty is to protect and serve the crown, not to enable what I believe would be a mistake. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret Finch looked terrified, her knuckles white as she gripped her portfolio. Queen Camilla's breathing was audible in the stillness of the room. A mistake? She repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. Yes, Your Majesty. As if summoned by their raised voices, Whiskers appeared in the doorway. The little Corgi trotted into the room with the confidence of an animal who had spent his entire life in royal spaces. He looked between James and Queen Camilla, sensing tension but not understanding its source. Queen Camilla glanced down at the dog, and for a moment something flickered in her expression. Was it doubt? Regret? James couldn't tell. Those corgis are suffering, James said quietly, taking advantage of the momentary softening. Not from lack of food or shelter, but from grief. They're mourning their mistress just as we are. separating them, sending them to strangers, treating them as problems to be solved. That's not compassion, Your Majesty. That's abandonment. Whiskers approached James and sat beside his polished boots, looking up at him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than a dog should. The Queen's love for these animals wasn't a weakness or an indulgence, James continued. It was part of what made her who she was. They grounded her, reminded her of simple joys in a life filled with ceremony and obligation. They were her anchor to humanity. Queen Camilla looked at Whiskers, then at James, her internal struggle visible in the tension of her jaw. "And what would you suggest?" she asked finally. "Keep all 15 dogs running through the castle indefinitely? Turn Windsor into a kennel to honor a dead woman's sentimentality? I would suggest finding a way to honor both the Queen's memory and the practical needs of the household," James replied. "Keep some of the Corgis here where they belong. Find homes for others with people who understand their significance, not as pets, but as guardians of memory. Make these decisions with love, not just efficiency." "And Whiskers?" Queen Camilla asked, though her tone had lost some of its earlier sharpness. James knelt down and gently stroked the Corgi's head. "Whiskers was her favorite. He should stay here, in the place where she loved him. If caring for him becomes too difficult, then reassess. But don't give him away because it's convenient." The Queen Consort was quiet for a long moment, studying both man and dog with an expression James couldn't read. "You realize what you're doing, don't you, Guardsman Matthews?" she said finally. "You're refusing a direct request from your Queen." "I am fulfilling my oath to protect and serve the Crown, Your Majesty. Sometimes that means protecting more than just buildings and people. Sometimes it means protecting memory and meaning." Queen Camilla walked to one of the tall windows and looked out at the castle grounds where the late Queen had walked with her Corgis countless times over the decades. "The newspapers would love this story," she said without turning around. "Royal Guard defies new Queen to save dead monarch's dog. They'd make me look heartless, and you look heroic." James felt a chill of fear. He had been so focused on doing what felt right that he hadn't considered the public relations implications of his stand. "I would never speak to the press about private royal matters, Your Majesty. My oath prevents that, regardless of any other considerations." "I know that," Queen Camilla said, turning back to face him. "Which is why this conversation is particularly remarkable. You're risking your career for a principle you'll never be able to publicize or defend." She returned to her chair, studying James with new interest. "Tell me, Guardsman, what did you think of Queen Elizabeth?" The personal nature of the question caught James off guard. "She was extraordinary, Your Majesty. Dedicated, gracious, never asked for anything she wasn't willing to give herself." "Did you love her?" The question was so unexpected, so intimate, that James struggled to formulate a response. In 12 years of service, no one had ever asked him about his feelings toward the monarch. I respected her deeply, Your Majesty." "That's not what I asked." James looked at Whiskers, still sitting loyally beside him, then back at Queen Camilla. "Yes, Your Majesty. Not romantically, not personally, but yes. I loved what she represented. I loved her dedication. I loved watching her with these dogs because it reminded me that underneath all the ceremony and protocol, she was still human, still capable of simple joy." Queen Camilla nodded slowly. "And you believe that by refusing to take Whiskers, you're protecting that love?" "I believe I'm protecting something that mattered to her. Something that should matter to all of us." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of history and the complexity of human emotion. Finally, Queen Camilla spoke. "Very well, Guardsman Matthews. You've made your position clear." James braced himself for dismissal, for consequences, for the end of everything he had worked to build. "Whiskers will remain at Windsor Castle," Queen Camilla announced, "as will 3 others of my choosing. The remaining 11 will be placed in carefully selected homes with people who understand their significance." James felt his knees weaken with relief, but Queen Camilla wasn't finished. "You will be personally responsible for Whisker's care and well-being. This is not a request, it's an assignment. You will ensure he receives proper exercise, medical attention, and companionship. You will report his condition to me monthly. Is this acceptable?" "Yes, Your Majesty, completely acceptable." Queen Camilla stood, and James immediately came to attention. "One final thing, Guardsman Matthews," she said as she prepared to leave. "Don't ever refuse a royal request again. Today I found your insubordination illuminating. Next time, I might find it treasonous." As she swept from the room with Margaret Finch hurrying behind her, James remained standing at attention until their footsteps faded. Only then did he allow himself to breathe normally again. Whiskers looked up at him and wagged his tail, blissfully unaware of the battle that had just been fought on his behalf. James knelt down and buried his face in the Corgi's soft fur, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of victory in equal measure. "We did it, old boy," he whispered. "We held our ground." 2 months after the confrontation in the blue drawing room, James Matthews found himself in a routine he never could have imagined. His days now included formal guard duties alongside the very personal responsibility of caring for Whiskers and the 3 other Corgis who had been allowed to remain at Windsor Castle. The transition hadn't been simple. Military life was built on predictability and order, but dogs operated on their own mysterious schedules of need and emotion. James quickly learned that Whiskers required a morning walk before the changing of the guard ceremony, preferred his dinner at exactly 5:30, and suffered from nightmares that left him whimpering and searching through empty rooms. The other 3 remaining Corgis, Duchess, Biscuit, and Pepper, each had their own personalities and needs. Duchess, a regal female with a silver muzzle, seemed to have appointed herself pack leader in the Queen's absence. Biscuit, the youngest at only 6 years old, still possessed puppy-like energy that required careful management during state functions. Pepper, nearly as old as Whiskers, had developed arthritis that made climbing stairs difficult, but hadn't diminished his determination to follow his human companions everywhere. James discovered that caring for 4 grieving Corgis required skills never covered in military training. He learned to read their moods, to recognize when Duchess needed extra attention to maintain her leadership role, when Biscuit's hyperactivity masked anxiety, when Pepper's stubbornness was actually pain, and when Whiskers' searching behavior was intensifying. The castle staff had initially watched James's new dual role with curiosity and some skepticism. How could a Queen's Guard maintain proper military bearing while carrying dog treats in his pocket? How could he protect the royal family while worrying about veterinary appointments? But gradually, something remarkable happened. The other guards began to understand that James's care for the Corgis wasn't separate from his duty. It was an extension of it. When Princess Anne visited and Whiskers ran to greet her with his old enthusiasm, the joy on her face reminded everyone that these animals were living bridges to the beloved Queen they had all served. The children in the royal family, particularly the younger grandchildren and great-grandchildren, delighted in finding James during their castle visits. He would be stationed at formal attention, but they knew that Whiskers or one of the others was likely nearby, and James always somehow managed to facilitate brief, joy-filled encounters that brightened everyone's day. Queen Camilla, true to her word, required monthly reports on the Corgis' well-being. These meetings, initially formal and somewhat tense, gradually evolved into genuine conversations about the animal's health, behavior, and needs. "Whiskers has been sleeping better," James reported during their 3rd monthly meeting. "The nightmares have decreased significantly since I started leaving a piece of the late Queen's clothing in his sleeping area." Queen Camilla raised an eyebrow. Whose idea was that? Mrs. Henderson suggested it, Your Majesty. She said the Queen often left a scarf or sweater where the dogs could smell her scent when she traveled. And it helps? Yes, Your Majesty. All 4 of them seem calmer when they can sense her presence somehow. Queen Camilla made a note in her personal journal. James had learned that she kept detailed records of their conversations, though he never knew what she did with the information. The veterinarian's report indicates Pepper's arthritis is worsening, she said, consulting a different document. Yes, Your Majesty. We've adjusted his exercise routine and Dr. Williams has prescribed medication. Pepper doesn't like the pills, but we've found success hiding them in liver treats. And the others? Duchess had a minor ear infection last month, but it's cleared up completely. Biscuit passed his annual examination with flying colors, though Dr. Williams recommends monitoring his weight. And Whiskers... James paused. Whiskers has been the most challenging, emotionally speaking. Queen Camilla looked up from her notes. In what way? He still searches for the Queen every evening around 6 o'clock, when she used to retire to her private chambers. He'll sit outside her former room and wait, sometimes for hours. That sounds heartbreaking. It is, Your Majesty. But Mrs. Henderson and I have developed a routine. One of us will sit with him during those times, talk to him gently, eventually coax him to come for his evening meal. He's slowly getting better about it. Queen Camilla was quiet for a moment. You realize you've become essentially a dog therapist along with your other duties? James smiled slightly. I suppose I have, Your Majesty. Do you ever regret it? The additional responsibility, the complexity it's added to your life? The question was more personal than their usual professional discussions, and James sensed genuine curiosity behind it. No, Your Majesty. I don't regret it at all. Why not? James considered his words carefully. Because taking care of them feels like taking care of something larger than myself. When Whiskers finally stopped searching for the Queen and started sleeping through the night, it felt like helping heal a small piece of the grief we're all carrying. Queen Camilla made another note, then set down her pen entirely. Guardsman Matthews, I owe you an apology. The statement was so unexpected that James wasn't sure he had heard correctly. Your Majesty? When you refused to take Whiskers home with you, I was angry. I felt you were challenging my authority and making my life more difficult. She looked directly at him. I was wrong. James remained silent, sensing that Queen Camilla needed to continue. You understood something I didn't. These animals aren't just pets, and they're not just problems to be solved. They're living embodiments of the Queen's capacity for love. By keeping them here, by caring for them with such dedication, you've preserved something essential about who she was. Thank you, Your Majesty. The staff tells me that visitors consistently comment on the Corgis' presence in the castle. They see it as evidence that the Queen's spirit lives on. Tour guides report that seeing Whiskers sleeping in a patch of sunlight near the Queen's favorite chair moves people to tears, happy tears. James had noticed this himself. Tourists would spot one of the Corgis during public tours, and their entire demeanor would change. Stern faces would soften, cameras would come out, and inevitably someone would share a memory of their own beloved pet or recall a news story about the Queen's famous love for her dogs. You've made these animals ambassadors of memory, Queen Camilla continued, and you've done it while maintaining your military duties with distinction. Your commanding officer speaks very highly of your service. I'm grateful for that, Your Majesty. Queen Camilla picked up a different document from her desk. Which brings me to another matter. You're eligible for promotion to Sergeant of the Guard next year. Your record indicates exemplary service and leadership qualities. James felt a familiar flutter of ambition. Sergeant of the Guard was a position he had dreamed of achieving since joining the service. However, Queen Camilla continued, accepting that promotion would mean reassignment to different duties. less flexibility for your current responsibilities with the Corgis. The implication hung in the air between them. James would have to choose between career advancement and continued care for the animals. "I see," James said quietly. "What would you choose if forced to decide?" James thought about Whisker's trusting brown eyes, about Duchess's dignified leadership, about Biscuit's joyful energy, about Pepper's determined loyalty despite his aching joints. He thought about the late Queen's voice saying that her dogs didn't care about crowns or protocols. They just wanted love and loyalty. "I would choose to stay with them, Your Majesty." Queen Camilla smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed her face entirely. "I thought you might, which is why I've spoken with your commanding officer about creating a new position, Senior Guardian of Royal Companions. Same pay grade as Sergeant, same prestige, but with specific responsibilities for the care and protection of the remaining Corgis." James felt his breath catch. "Your Majesty? The position would be yours, if you want it. Official recognition for what you're already doing, with the resources and authority to do it properly." Yes, Your Majesty. I would be honored." "Excellent. Margaret will provide you with the official paperwork. Your appointment will be announced next month." As Queen Camilla gathered her documents, James felt a sense of completion he hadn't expected. His defiance in this very room 2 months ago had led not to punishment, but to purpose. "One last thing," Queen Camilla said as she prepared to leave. "The Queen Consort's official schedule includes a new weekly appointment, Tuesday afternoons with the Royal Companions and their guardian." James looked confused. "Your Majesty?" "I've decided to spend time with them each week, get to know them properly, learn what made them so special to the Queen." She paused at the door. "You'll need to teach me how to properly scratch behind Whisker's ears. He seems to have very specific preferences." After Queen Camilla left, James made his way to the gardens where the 4 Corgis were enjoying their afternoon exercise. They spotted him immediately and trotted over with varying degrees of enthusiasm and dignity. Whiskers reached him first, tail wagging, no longer the lost and grieving animal James had encountered months ago. The little dog had found new purpose, too, serving as unofficial ambassador to visitors while maintaining his role as guardian of the Queen's memory. James knelt down and was immediately surrounded by 4 small, warm bodies seeking attention and affection. As he scratched ears and dispensed treats from his pocket, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them all to this moment. He had joined the Queen's Guard to serve his country and honor his monarch. He never imagined that service would include learning to read the emotions of grieving Corgis, or that holding his ground in defense of 4 small dogs would become one of the most important stands of his life. That evening, as James completed his final patrol of the day, he walked past the Queen's former private chambers. Whiskers was there, as he sometimes still was, sitting quietly in the doorway. But tonight was different. Tonight, Whiskers wasn't searching or waiting. He was simply remembering, and there was peace in his stillness. James sat down beside him, and together they shared a moment of quiet communion with the past and acceptance of the future. The Queen was gone, but her capacity for love lived on in the loyalty of her animals and the dedication of those who understood that some responsibilities transcend duty. Some loyalties run deeper than protocol, and sometimes the smallest acts of defiance create the most profound changes. In the distance, the lights of Windsor Castle glowed against the evening sky, sheltering within its ancient walls the continuing story of love, loss, and the remarkable resilience of both human and canine hearts. Whiskers leaned against James's leg, warm and content, a living testament to the truth that holding your ground sometimes means standing still, and sometimes it means moving forward, but it always means staying faithful to what matters most. The next morning would bring new duties, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve both crown and memory. But tonight brought peace, and the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept to a queen who had devoted her life to duty and asked for nothing in return except the simple, unconditional love of 4 small dogs who would never forget her.